He offered me £10,000 to lie to his entire family. All I had to do was pretend to be his wife for one weekend, 3 days at his family's country house, smile, hold his hand, call him darling, and let his grandmother believe that her grandson had finally found love. That was all. 3 days of pretending and £10,000. I said yes before he even finished explaining. I need you to understand how desperate I was, so you do not judge me too quickly. My name is Ava. I was 24 years old and I was drowning. My mother had been ill for 2 years. The treatment was expensive, more expensive than I can tell you. I worked 2 jobs, a cafe in the morning and a bar at night, and still it was never enough. Every month I fell a little further behind. The letters from the bank grew angrier. I had sold almost everything I owned. I lay awake at night doing sums in my head, the same hopeless sums over and over. £10,000 would not fix everything, but it would buy my mother 3 more months of treatment. 3 more months. And there is nothing in this world I would not have done for 3 more months. Let me tell you what my days were like, so you understand. I woke at 5 every morning. I opened the cafe at 6. I worked until 3, on my feet the whole time, smiling at customers, carrying trays, wiping tables. Then I went home, checked on my mother, made her lunch, gave her medicine, sat with her for an hour. Then I changed my clothes and went to the bar, where I worked until midnight, pouring drinks for people who did not see me, laughing at jokes that were not funny, because a friendly barmaid earns more in tips. I got home at 1 in the morning. I slept 4 hours. Then I woke and did it all again. I did this 6 days a week. On my 1 day off, I did the washing, the cleaning, the shopping, and I sat with my mother, and I tried to pretend to her that everything was fine. She worried about me. A sick mother should not have to worry about her healthy daughter, but she did, because she could see what it was costing me. "You're wasting your youth on me," she said once, crying. "I'm holding you back." I told her that was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. I told her she was the reason I got up every morning. Both of those things were true. And still, it was not enough. The money was never enough. Every month, the hole got deeper. So when a man I had served coffee to walked back into my cafe one rainy afternoon and offered me a strange, impossible deal, I did not laugh. I did not say no. I listened. His name was Julian Hart. He was tall, well-dressed, and very serious. He was the kind of man who looked like he had never worried about money in his life, and I later learned that he never had. His family was old and rich. The Harts owned half the county, it seemed. "I'll come straight to the point," he said, sitting across from me at a small corner table. "This weekend is my grandmother's 80th birthday. The whole family will be there, and my grandmother has one wish before she dies, which the doctors say may be quite soon. She wants to know that I am happy, settled, married." He paused. "I am none of those things, and I have run out of ways to disappoint her." "So you want to hire a wife?" I said. "For 3 days. He said. "You would come to the house. You would pretend to be my wife. We would say we married quietly, just the 2 of us, which explains why no one has met you. You would be charming and kind, and you would make an old woman happy in what may be her last birthday. And then you would go home, £10,000 richer, and we would never see each other again." I looked at this cold, serious man, and I asked the only question that mattered. "Why me?" I said. "You could hire anyone, an actress, someone from an agency." For the first time, something flickered in his face, something almost human. Because I have watched you work in this cafe for 3 weeks, he said quietly. You are kind to everyone. The lonely old man who comes in every morning. You remember his name and his order. The mother with the crying baby. You carried her tray so she wouldn't have to. You are kind when you think no one is watching. And my grandmother will see through anything false in a second. She needs to believe I married someone good. He looked at me. You are the only genuinely kind person I have met in a very long time. And my grandmother deserves to meet someone kind before she goes. I did not know what to say to that, so I said yes. We agreed on the rules that same afternoon. We would say we had married 6 months ago. We would hold hands and be affectionate, but nothing more than that. I would sleep in his room because a married couple could hardly sleep apart, but he would take the couch. It was strictly business, a performance, nothing real. He gave me an envelope with the first half of the money and a list of facts about himself that a wife would know. His favorite food, the name of his first dog, the scar on his left hand, and how he got it. I studied that list on the bus home like it was the most important exam of my life. In a way, it was. His favorite food was his grandmother's apple pie. His first dog was called Biscuit. The scar on his left hand came from a broken window when he was 9, climbing where he should not have been. He did not eat mushrooms. He hated the sea, but loved rivers. His middle name was Edward, after his grandfather. He took his coffee black, no sugar, which I already knew, because I had made it for him a dozen times without ever knowing his name. I read the list until I knew it by heart. And the strange thing was, the more I learned about this man, these small, human details, the less he frightened me. A man who names his dog Biscuit and loves his grandmother's apple pie is not so cold after all. Somewhere behind the serious face and the expensive suit, there was a real person. I did not know, that night on the bus, how well I would come to know him. I only knew the facts on a list, but even the facts made me curious. When I got home, my mother was awake, and she asked me why I was smiling at a piece of paper. I told her it was nothing. It was the first lie of many I would tell that week, but it was also, in a way, the beginning of everything true. 2 days later, a car came to collect me, and we drove out of the gray city and into the green countryside, and my strange weekend began. The Hart family home was not a house. It was a mansion, old gray stone, covered in ivy, with more windows than I could count, sitting in gardens that went on forever. I had never seen anything like it. I sat in the car staring at it, and my courage nearly failed me completely. Breathe, Julian said beside me. It was almost the first kind thing he had said since the cafe. You'll be fine. Just be yourself. That's the whole point. Be myself, I said, while pretending to be your wife. Be yourself, he said. Just say you're my wife while you do it. And then the great front door opened, and his family poured out to meet us, and there was no more time to be afraid. There were so many of them, aunts and uncles and cousins, all curious, all smiling, all desperate to meet the mysterious woman that serious, private Julian had secretly married. They hugged me. They shook my hand. They asked me 100 questions. How did you meet? When's the real wedding party? Why did he keep you a secret, you gorgeous thing? And through it all, Julian kept his hand at the small of my back, steady and warm, and somehow I did not fall apart. There was one person, though, who did not smile, a cousin named Marcus. He was about Julian's age, sharp-eyed and cold, and he watched me from the moment I stepped out of the car with a look that made my stomach turn. When he shook my hand, he held it a moment too long. "Married 6 months," he said, "and none of us met you until today. How very convenient." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll forgive me if I'm curious about the woman who appeared just in time for Nana's birthday and Nana's will." "Marcus," Julian said sharply. "I'm only making conversation, cousin," Marcus said, and he walked away, but his eyes stayed on me all evening. I understood then that not everyone would be so easy to fool, and I understood that there was money at stake here, an old woman's fortune, and that some people were watching Julian's sudden wife very, very closely. I filed it away, and I made myself smile, and I played my part, and then I met her, the grandmother, Rose Hart. She was tiny. She sat in a chair by the window in a room full of afternoon light, wrapped in a soft blue shawl, and she was clearly very frail. But her eyes were the sharpest, brightest, most alive eyes I have ever seen. When Julian led me to her, those eyes fixed on me and did not let go. "So," she said. Her voice was thin but clear. "You are the one who finally caught my grandson." "I am," I said. My heart was pounding. This was the moment. This was the person I had to fool. "It's a great honor to meet you, Mrs. Hart. Call me Rose," she said. "Or Nana, if you're brave. Come here, child. Let me look at you." I knelt down beside her chair. She took my face in her two thin, cool hands, and she looked at me for a long, long moment. I felt as though she could see straight through my skin, straight into every lie I had come here to tell. "Yes," she said at last, softly. "There is a great deal of kindness in this face, and a great deal of sadness, too." She patted my cheek. "You have been carrying something heavy, haven't you, dear?" I could not speak because she was right, and I had not expected to be seen. "Everyone carries something," I finally managed. "Yes," Rose said, and she smiled, and it was the warmest smile I had ever seen. "But not everyone stays kind while they carry it. Julian, you have chosen well. Better than you know, I think." That first evening, I learned how to be Julian Hart's wife. I learned to reach for his hand without thinking. I learned to laugh at the family stories. I learned to lean my head on his shoulder during the long dinner and to feel him go still and careful when I did. We told our story, the story we had invented of a quiet wedding, just the two of us, on a beach at dawn. His family sighed happily, and Rose watched us both from the head of the table with those bright, knowing eyes. Dinner that first night was long and grand, at a table that could seat 30. I sat beside Julian, and I played my part, and I found, to my surprise, that it was not as hard as I had feared. When someone asked how he had proposed, Julian told a beautiful story, made up entirely on the spot, about a quiet morning and a ring hidden in a book, and I watched him tell it and thought, he is a better liar than I am. But then he reached under the table and took my hand while he told it, and his hand was trembling slightly, and I realized that he was not calm at all. He was as frightened as I was. We were two frightened people, holding hands under a table, lying to the people he loved, and somehow that shared fear made me feel less alone. Little Poppy fell asleep against my arm before the dessert came. I did not move for the rest of the meal so as not to wake her. Julian watched me hold his sleeping great niece, and there was something in his face I could not read. That first night, in his room, when the door was finally closed and we were alone, we stood in an awkward silence. "You did well," Julian said. "Better than I hoped." "Your grandmother is not easy to fool," I said. Something crossed his face. "No," he said, "she isn't." And then he took a blanket and lay down on the couch by the window and said goodnight and turned off the light. And I lay in his big bed in a stranger's house, pretending to be a wife, 10,000 pounds richer, and more confused than I had ever been in my life. The next day was the birthday. I had expected to spend it counting the hours until I could leave. Instead, something unexpected happened. I began to enjoy myself. The family was warm in a way I had never known. My own family was small, just my mother and me, but the hearts were loud and loving and endless. The cousins pulled me into their games. The aunts fed me constantly. There was a little girl, a great niece named Poppy, maybe 6 years old, who decided within an hour that I was her favorite person in the world, and who followed me everywhere, holding my hand, chattering about her drawings and her cat. "She likes you," Julian said, watching us. "Poppy doesn't like anyone. She's a very serious judge of character." "Then I'm honored," I said, and I lifted the little girl up onto my hip, and she wrapped her arms around my neck, and something in my chest ached in a way I did not expect. I had spent so long taking care of my sick mother that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply be part of a family, to be surrounded by noise and warmth and people who wanted you there. For a few hours, I let myself pretend it was mine. Not the money, not the deal. This, the warmth, the belonging. And it was the sweetest and the saddest thing I had felt in years, because I knew that on Sunday it would all disappear and I would go back to my 4 hours of sleep and my 2 jobs and my mother's medicine. And this golden house full of laughter would become a place I once visited in a life that was never really mine. And Julian, my fake husband, slowly, over the course of that long golden day, began to change. The cold, serious man from the cafe began to disappear. Around his family, around me, he softened. He laughed, a real laugh, at something a cousin said, and I realized I had never heard him laugh before. He told a story about falling out of a tree as a boy, and his eyes were bright. And once, when I was talking to Rose, I looked up and found him watching me across the room with an expression I could not name. When he saw me catch him, he did not look away. He smiled. It did something to me, that smile, something I had not agreed to in our deal. Early that morning, before the house woke, I could not sleep, so I went down to the kitchen to make tea. Julian was already there, standing at the window in the gray dawn light, a cup in his hands, watching the mist lift off the gardens. He looked different in that light, younger, softer, without the weight of the performance, without his family watching. He was just a tired man alone at dawn. "Couldn't sleep either?" he said. "No," I said. I made my tea, and I came and stood beside him at the window. We did not speak for a while. The garden was silver and still. "I want to thank you," he said quietly, "for yesterday, for being kind to Poppy, for sitting with Nana. You didn't have to do any of that. It wasn't in the deal, but you did it anyway, because that's just who you are." He turned to look at me. "I hired you to pretend to be a good person, Ava. I didn't expect you to actually be one. I think I forgot that they still existed." "They do," I said softly. "There are more of us than you think. You just have to stop looking only at the people who want your money." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know the funny thing? You're the first person in years who has looked at me and not seen the heart fortune. You look at me like I'm just a person." "You are just a person," I said. "A person who names his dog Biscuit and can't sleep at dawn." He laughed softly into the quiet kitchen, and for a moment the space between us was very warm again, the way it would be that night on the dance floor. Then the house began to stir above us, and the day began, and we stepped back into our roles. But something had shifted, standing at that window in the dawn, something small and real that neither of us was brave enough to name yet. That afternoon, Rose asked to speak with me alone. I sat with her by the window in the golden light, and she held my hand in her thin one. "Tell me about your mother," she said. I froze. "How did you?" "You have the look of a girl who is caring for someone," Rose said gently. "I know that look. I wore it myself once for my own mother. Tell me." And I do not know why, but I told her. Not the lie, the truth. I told her my mother was ill. I told her about the treatment and the money and the long nights and the fear. I did not tell her about the deal with Julian, of course, but everything else I told her, because her eyes were so kind and because I was so tired of carrying it all alone. She listened to every word, and when I finished, she squeezed my hand. "You are a good daughter," she said, "and a good woman. My grandson is very lucky. I hope he knows it." She paused, and her bright eyes searched my face. "Does he know it, Ava? Does he treat you well?" I hesitated. "He's a good man. He's just careful with his heart." "Yes," Rose said sadly. "He has always been that way. He was hurt, years ago. A young woman he loved very much, who only wanted his money. When she left, she took something from him. His trust, his softness. He built a wall so high that I feared no one would ever get over it." She looked at me. "But you seem to have climbed it. I have not seen him laugh like he laughed today in 5 years." I did not know what to say, because Rose thought that laugh was for me, his loving wife. And the terrible thing was, I was beginning to wish it were true. That night, there was a party. The great old house filled with light and music and 100 guests. And at some point in the evening, a slow song began to play, and Julian appeared before me and held out his hand. "We should dance," he said. "People will expect it." So we danced, and it was not like the hand-holding or the laughing at dinner, which were part of the performance. This was something else. He held me close, one hand warm against my back, the other holding my hand against his chest, and I felt his heart beating, fast, faster than a man just performing would need it to beat. We moved slowly together in the candlelight. I could smell him, clean and warm. I could feel the strength of him, and underneath it, somehow, a kind of nervousness, as if this powerful man was afraid of me, of what was happening. "You're a good dancer," I said, because I had to say something, because the silence was too full. "My grandmother made me learn," he said. "When I was 12, she said a heart man who couldn't dance was a disgrace." He smiled down at me. I hated it. I never once thought I'd be grateful. But right now, in this exact moment, I am extremely grateful to my grandmother. I laughed, and he laughed, and for a moment, we were just two people, dancing, laughing, with no deal between us at all. And for a few minutes, I forgot completely that any of it was pretend. I looked up at him, and he looked down at me, and the space between us grew very small and very warm. "Ava," he said quietly, just my name. And then, across the room, someone dropped a glass, and it shattered, and the spell broke, and we stepped apart, both of us breathing a little too fast, both of us pretending nothing had happened. Later that night, in his room, the careful silence between us was different, heavier. "I have to tell you something," Julian said. He was standing by the window, not looking at me. "This weekend was supposed to be simple, a performance, a favor paid for, but it hasn't been simple, not for me." He turned to face me. "When I watched you with my grandmother today, when we danced, I stopped pretending somewhere along the way, and I don't know when it happened, but it stopped being an act. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. 'Julian,' I said, 'you hired me. There's money. It's a job. If we let it become something real and then it falls apart, I don't think I could.' 'I know,' he said. 'I know. That's why I'm telling you now, before the weekend ends, before you go home.' And I convinced myself I imagined all of it. 'I don't want you to be my wife for a weekend, Ava. I think I want you to be my wife for real.' And I have never said anything like that to anyone in my life. I wanted to believe him, but I had learned, in 24 hard years, not to trust things that seem too good. 'You barely know me,' I said. 'I know that you are kind when no one is watching,' he said. 'I know that you gave up everything to care for your mother. I know that you told my grandmother the truth about your life today, because I heard some of it, and it broke my heart. I know more about who you really are than I have ever known about anyone. The rest, I want a lifetime to learn.' I did not have an answer. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. So I said the coward's thing. 'Let's just get through tomorrow,' I said. 'Then we'll see.' He nodded, slowly. 'All right,' he said. 'Tomorrow.' But we did not get to see, because the next morning, everything changed. Rose did not come down for breakfast. And then there was a doctor, and hushed voices, and Julian's face going white as he ran up the stairs. Rose had grown very weak in the night. The family gathered, frightened and quiet, in the great hall. I did not know what to do. I was not really family. I was a hired stranger. So I stood at the edge of it all, feeling like a fraud, until a nurse came down and said that Rose was asking for someone. She was asking for me. I went up to her room. She lay small and pale in the great bed, but her eyes were still bright. She smiled when she saw me and patted the bed beside her. 'Sit, child,' she whispered. 'I don't have much strength, so I'll be quick.' I sat. I took her thin hand. 'I know,' she said. 'You know what, Nana?' I said. 'I know it isn't real,' she said. Her bright eyes held mine. 'The marriage. I've known since the moment you walked in. My grandson doesn't have a wife. He would have told me. He tells me everything. That boy, even when he thinks he doesn't.' I felt the blood drain from my face. 'Rose, I'm so sorry. I can explain.' 'Hush,' she said, and she smiled. 'I'm not angry. Do you know why? Because I have watched you both this weekend. And whatever arrangement brought you here, whatever lie you agreed to tell an old woman, it doesn't matter. Because somewhere between Friday and today, it stopped being a lie. I have seen the way that boy looks at you. I have not seen him look at anything that way since he was small. That is not pretend, Ava. That is the realest thing I have seen in years.' Tears were running down my face now. 'I let you both keep your little secret,' she went on, 'because I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see if my grandson could love again before I go. And he can, because of you. So I have one last wish. not for a fake wife, for a real one. She squeezed my hand with the last of her strength. Don't run from it, child. I know you're frightened. I know your life is hard, and love feels like a risk you can't afford. But real things are rare. When you find one, you hold on with both hands. Promise me you won't run. I promise, I whispered, and I meant it. Rose's heart died 2 days later, peacefully in her sleep, with her family around her. And the last thing she ever said to me when I sat with her that final morning was, "Thank you for making my grandson laugh again." I stayed for the funeral. I could not have left. And in those gray, sad days, something happened between Julian and me that no amount of money could have bought. We grieved together. We held each other up. The pretending was long gone, burned away by real sorrow and real comfort. What was left was simply the truth. The night before the funeral, I found Julian alone in the garden, in the dark, sitting on a bench beneath the old tree. He was not crying. He was just sitting, very still, staring at nothing. I sat down beside him. I did not say any of the useless things. I just took his hand. "She was the only one who ever really saw me," he said at last, his voice rough. "My parents saw a heart, an heir, a name to protect. But Nana saw me, just me. And now she's gone, and I keep thinking, who will see me now?" "I see you," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true, completely true, and that I was not afraid to say it. "I've only known you for 3 days, Julian, and half of it was pretend. But the half that was real, I saw. I see you." He turned and looked at me in the dark, and his eyes were shining. "I don't want you to go home on Sunday," he said quietly. "I know that wasn't the deal. I know I have no right, but I don't. I don't want you to go." "Let's not talk about Sunday tonight," I said. "Tonight, let's just sit here. Let me just be here with you." And so we sat under Nana's tree in the dark, holding hands, two people who had started as a lie and become, somehow, the only real thing in each other's grief. And Marcus and his suspicions, and the will, and the money, and the whole strange arrangement, none of it mattered at all. There was only this, only him, only the truth. We were both too frightened to name. On the day I was finally meant to leave, Julian walked me to the car. He was holding the second envelope, the rest of the money, my mother's 3 months. "Here," he said. "You've more than earned it, all of it and more. Whatever you need for your mother, for as long as you need it. That's not part of any deal. That's just me." I took the envelope, and then I looked at this man, this careful, wounded, wonderful man, and I remembered my promise to Rose. "I know you're frightened. Don't run." "I don't want it to end here," I said. "The pretending is over, but I don't want the rest of it to be over. I made your grandmother a promise. I promised her I wouldn't run from something real." I took a breath. "So I'm not running. If you meant what you said, if it was real for you too." Julian's careful face broke open into the most beautiful, relieved, joyful smile I have ever seen. "It was real," he said. "It's the only real thing I have. Stay, Ava, not for a weekend, for as long as you'll have me." There was, I should tell you, one more surprise. After the funeral, when the family gathered to hear Rose's will, Cousin Marcus sat forward in his chair, certain that Julian's sudden marriage had been a trick to win the old woman's fortune, ready to expose us both. But Rose, clever to the very end, had left a letter to be read aloud, along with her will. In it, she wrote that she knew her family better than they knew themselves. She left her money in equal shares, fairly to all of them, so that no one could fight. And then she added one last line, which the lawyer read out in his dry voice while the whole room listened. And to the young woman my grandson brought home this weekend, Rose had written, whether she is his wife on paper or only in his heart, I leave my mother's blue shawl and this piece of advice. Real things are rare, my dear. Hold on with both hands. Marcus went very red and said nothing and never troubled us again, because there was nothing to expose. Whatever we had started as, by the time Rose died, there was no lie left to find. There was only two people who had fallen in love, exactly as she had planned. We did not marry on a beach at dawn, the way our invented story went. We married a year later, in the gardens of that great gray house under the tree Julian had once fallen out of as a boy. My mother was there, well enough by then to walk me down the path, her treatment long since paid for, her health slowly, steadily returning. And in the front row, there was one empty chair. We left it empty on purpose. On the seat, we placed a soft blue shawl and a single white rose. For Rose's heart, who had seen the truth before either of us did, who had known from the very first moment that the lie we told her would become the truest thing in our lives. Sometimes I think about that rainy afternoon in the cafe when a serious stranger offered me money to lie to his family. I think about how close I came to saying no, how close I came to never knowing him at all. He hired me to play his wife for one weekend. His family believed every word. But here is the secret Rose understood before anyone. By the end of that weekend, it was not a performance anymore. By the end of that weekend, every word was true.